Security guard caught a snake in our apartment complex and delivered it straight to my door. I was absolutely terrified when I opened it to find Marcus, our night security guard, holding a writhing 3-foot garden snake in his gloved hands with this massive grin on his face. He said he found it near the pool area and figured since I was the animal person in the building, I'd know what to do with it. The thing is, I'm not an animal person. I've never been an animal person. I don't have pets. I don't particularly like reptiles. I'm actually pretty scared of snakes if I'm being honest. So standing there in my doorway at 9:30 on a Tuesday night, still in my work clothes, exhausted from a double shift at the hospital where I work as an ER nurse, the last thing I wanted was a snake delivery. I told Marcus there must be some mistake, that I don't do snakes, that he should call animal control or something. But he just kept insisting, saying that my neighbor Jennifer from 4C told him I was really into wildlife rescue and would be thrilled to handle it. Jennifer. Of course it was Jennifer. That should have been my first clue that something was off, but I was too tired and too focused on the snake currently trying to wrap itself around Marcus's wrist to really process the weirdness of that claim. Jennifer and I weren't friends. We weren't enemies either, or at least I didn't think we were. We were just neighbors who occasionally said hello in the hallway and complained about the building's terrible water pressure in the elevator. I ended up taking the snake because Marcus looked so proud of himself for bringing it to me, and I didn't have the heart to crush his enthusiasm. I found an old plastic storage container, poked some holes in the lid with a screwdriver, put some water in a small dish, and gently coaxed the snake inside with a wooden spoon because there was no way I was touching it with my bare hands. The snake seemed pretty calm once it was in the container, just curled up in the corner, occasionally flicking its tongue out. I set it on my kitchen counter and spent the next hour researching local wildlife rescue organizations, finally finding one that was open until midnight for emergency drop-offs. I drove the snake across town to the rescue center, handed it over to a very nice volunteer who assured me it was just a common garter snake and completely harmless, and then drove back home. By the time I got back to my apartment, it was almost 11:30, and I still hadn't eaten dinner or showered. I was annoyed, but figured it was just one of those weird things that happen when you live in a large apartment complex. I'd deal with the Jennifer confusion later. Except the next evening when I got home from work, there was another container outside my door. This one had a note taped to it that said, "Found another one. You're so great with these. Marcus," and inside was another snake. Not a garter snake this time, but what looked like some kind of small water snake. I was furious. I knocked on Jennifer's door immediately, ready to clear up whatever misunderstanding had led Marcus to believe I was the building's unofficial reptile wrangler, but she didn't answer. I could hear her TV on inside, could see the light under her door, but she wouldn't come out. I took care of the second snake the same way I had the first, another late-night trip to the wildlife rescue, another missed dinner. When I got back, I left a note on Jennifer's door asking her to please stop telling people I was into wildlife rescue because I wasn't, and could she please correct the misinformation with Marcus and anyone else she might have told. The next morning, the note was gone, but I didn't get any response. Then things got weird. I started getting emails. The first one came from the apartment complex's community message board, which I barely ever checked. Someone named Concerned Resident 247 had posted a long message about how there was a tenant in the building who was illegally keeping reptiles in their apartment, potentially dozens of them, and it was creating a safety hazard for everyone, especially children and pets. The post didn't name me specifically, but it mentioned the 4th floor and someone who worked in the medical field, which, in a building this size, pretty much narrowed it down to me and maybe 2 other people. I responded immediately, explaining the situation, clarifying that I had 0 reptiles in my apartment and had simply helped relocate 2 snakes that had been found on the property. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. More posts started appearing. Someone claimed they'd seen me bringing in large containers at odd hours of the night. Someone else said they'd heard hissing sounds coming from my apartment. Another person said their daughter had nightmares after seeing me parading a snake around the hallway, which absolutely never happened. The Wildlife Rescue Center was inside a building. I transported the snakes in sealed containers directly from my apartment to my car. There was 0 parading involved. I tried to defend myself on the message board, but for every clarification I posted, 3 more accusations would pop up. The building manager, a perpetually stressed woman named Carol who always looked like she'd rather be anywhere else, sent me an email asking me to come to her office for a meeting. When I showed up, she had printed out all the message board posts and asked me point blank if I was running some kind of unauthorized animal rescue operation out of my apartment. I laughed because the question was so absurd, but Carol didn't laugh back. She said she'd received multiple complaints, that she was required to take them seriously, and that she needed to schedule an apartment inspection. I told her fine, inspect away. She wouldn't find anything because there was nothing to find. She scheduled it for the following Tuesday at 10 in the morning, which meant I'd have to take time off work, but at least it would clear my name. That weekend, I ran into Jennifer at the mailboxes. I tried to talk to her, to ask her why she'd told Marcus I was into wildlife rescue, but she looked at me with these wide, innocent eyes and said she had no idea what I was talking about. She said she'd never spoken to Marcus about me, that maybe he'd confused me with someone else, and then she quickly grabbed her mail and practically ran back to her apartment. Something about the interaction felt off, rehearsed almost, but I couldn't put my finger on why. The inspection happened on Tuesday. Carol showed up with a maintenance guy named Ray, and they went through my entire apartment with clipboards and cameras. They opened every closet, checked under the bed, looked in the bathroom cabinets, even checked inside my oven and refrigerator like I might be hiding snakes between the milk and the leftover Chinese food. They found nothing, obviously, because there was nothing to find. Carol seemed almost disappointed, which should have been my second clue that something bigger was going on, but I was just relieved to have the whole thing over with. Carol sent an email to the community message board stating that an inspection had been conducted and no animals or evidence of animals had been found in my apartment. I thought that would settle it. It didn't. The posts continued, now claiming I must have hidden the snakes elsewhere during the inspection, that I'd been tipped off, that the inspection was a cover-up. It was insane. I started recognizing some of the usernames from other posts on the board, started seeing patterns in the writing styles. At least 3 of the accounts seemed to be the same person, maybe more. I did some digging. The message board required you to register with your apartment number, but you could choose any display name you wanted. I cross-referenced the posting times with my own observations of comings and goings in the hallway, started paying attention to who was around when these posts went up. I'm not some kind of detective, but I work in an ER. I'm good at pattern recognition and piecing together information from incomplete data. It took me about a week, but I became pretty certain that at least half of the accounts posting about me were Jennifer. But why? That was the question that kept me up at night. What had I done to Jennifer to make her launch this weird campaign against me? I mentally reviewed every interaction we'd ever had. We'd lived on the same floor for almost 2 years. I'd helped her carry groceries once when her bags broke in the elevator. She'd borrowed sugar from me one time. We'd served on the building's holiday decoration committee together the previous year, which mostly involved hanging some garland in the lobby and arguing about whether the Christmas tree should be real or fake. I'd voted for fake. She'd voted for real. Fake had won. Could she really be holding a grudge over a Christmas tree debate from a year ago? I decided to talk to Marcus, to get to the bottom of where he'd really gotten the information about me being into wildlife rescue. I caught him during his shift one evening and asked him directly. He seemed confused by the question at first, then confirmed that yes, Jennifer from 4C had told him I'd be happy to handle any snakes or other critters found on the property. He said she'd mentioned it a few weeks earlier, just in passing, said something about how I volunteered at a wildlife center on weekends and loved all kinds of animals. None of that was true. I'd never volunteered at a wildlife center. I spent my weekends sleeping, doing laundry, and occasionally meeting my sister for brunch. I asked Marcus if he was absolutely sure it was Jennifer who told him this, and he said yes. He remembered specifically because they'd been chatting by the mailboxes and a stray cat had walked through the lobby, and that's what had prompted the conversation about animals. So Jennifer had definitely lied to Marcus, had created this entire false narrative about me being an animal enthusiast. But the snakes, where were the snakes coming from? Our apartment complex was in the middle of the city, not exactly prime snake habitat. We had a small pool area with some landscaping, but I'd lived here for 2 years and never heard of anyone finding a snake on the property before this. I asked Marcus about that too. Where exactly had he found the snakes? He said the first one had been in a bucket near the pool equipment shed, just sitting there, and the second one had been in a similar bucket in the same area. When I asked if that seemed strange to him, he shrugged and said maybe someone else had caught them and left them there, intending to relocate them but forgot or something. Or someone had put them there on purpose, knowing Marcus would find them and bring them to me. The thought made my skin crawl. I started checking the pool area regularly, looking for any signs of more planted snakes, but I didn't find any. The snake deliveries had stopped after the second one, probably because the apartment inspection had happened and Jennifer's plan, whatever it was, hadn't worked the way she'd wanted. I thought maybe things would just die down on their own. I stopped checking the community message board, stopped responding to the accusations, figured if I didn't engage, people would lose interest and move on to the next piece of building drama. And for a few weeks, it seemed to work. I didn't hear anything more about snakes or illegal animal hoarding. Life went back to normal. Then I met David. I'd seen him around the building a few times, noticed him because he was attractive in that casual, effortless way some people are. Dark hair, nice smile, always seemed to be carrying interesting books. He lived on the 6th floor, and we'd exchanged pleasantries in the elevator a few times. Then one Saturday, we ended up at the same coffee shop down the street from our building, both reading alone at separate tables. He came over and asked if I was from the building on Maple Street. I confirmed I was, and he asked if he could join me. We talked for 3 hours. He was a graphic designer who worked from home, loved old movies and hiking, had recently moved to the city from Portland. He was funny and smart and easy to talk to, and when he asked if I wanted to grab dinner sometime, I said yes without hesitation. We went out that next Wednesday, and it was one of the best first dates I'd ever had. He was a gentleman, asked questions, and actually listened to the answers. Made me laugh so hard I snorted wine through my nose at one point, which should have been embarrassing, but he just laughed too and said it was adorable. We started seeing each other regularly. Within a month, we were basically dating, though we hadn't put an official label on it. He'd come down to my apartment for movie nights. I'd go up to his place for dinner. He was a great cook, which was lucky because I could barely boil water without burning it. Things were good, really good, better than I'd had in a long time. I told him about the snake incident and the weird message board drama during one of our dates, framed it as a funny story about crazy neighbor stuff. He laughed and said every building had at least one person stirring up drama, that his last apartment complex had someone who was convinced the building was haunted and would send long emails about paranormal activity at 3 in the morning. We bonded over weird neighbor stories, and I felt relieved to have finally told someone about it, to have it out in the open. Then one night, about 6 weeks into our relationship, I was leaving David's apartment around 11. We did dinner and watched a movie, and I had an early shift the next morning, so I needed to get some sleep. As I was walking down the hallway toward the stairs, I saw Jennifer getting off the elevator. She saw me too, and there was this moment where we just looked at each other. Then she looked at David's apartment door, which I'd just come out of, then back at me, and something flickered across her face, something dark and angry. She didn't say anything, just walked past me to her apartment, but the look she'd given me made my stomach turn. It was pure hatred, just for a second, before she'd rearranged her features back into neutrality. I'd seen that look before in the ER, usually on people right before they became violent. It was a look that said I'd done something unforgivable, though I had no idea what. The next day, the message board posts started again, but this time they weren't about snakes. They were about noise complaints, multiple accounts claiming that there was constant loud music, shouting, parties at all hours coming from my apartment. None of it was true. I lived alone, worked long shifts, and was usually asleep by 10:30 on work nights. The only time I'd had more than one person in my apartment recently was when my sister had visited 2 weeks ago, and we'd watched TV and eaten pizza. Definitely not a raging party. I ignored the posts, but then I started getting official noise complaints filed with building management. Carol sent me warning emails, saying that if the noise continued, I could face fines or even eviction. I tried to explain that there was no noise, that I was being harassed, but Carol said she had to take the complaints seriously and that multiple residents had reported disturbances. I asked who had complained. She said she couldn't disclose that information, it was confidential. I asked if she'd personally heard any noise from my apartment. She admitted she hadn't, but said that didn't mean it wasn't happening. I asked if she could have someone monitor the situation, maybe have Marcus or one of the other security guards check the noise levels near my apartment during the times these complaints were supposedly happening. She said she'd consider it, but made no promises. The complaints kept coming, then they escalated. Someone filed a complaint saying I'd been smoking in my apartment, which violated the lease. I don't smoke, never have. Someone else claimed I had unauthorized guests staying overnight multiple nights a week, also a lease violation. That one might have been about David, but he'd only stayed over a handful of times, and the lease didn't prohibit overnight guests. It prohibited people living in the apartment who weren't on the lease. I felt like I was going crazy. I started documenting everything, keeping a log of my comings and goings, what time I went to bed, what time I woke up, whether I had anyone over. I started recording audio in my apartment just to prove that there was no excessive noise. I was building a defense case for something I hadn't done, and it was exhausting. David noticed I was stressed. I told him what was going on, showed him some of the message board posts and the emails from Carol. He was supportive, said it was clearly harassment and I should report it to the police. I wasn't sure the police would care about message board drama, but I appreciated that he was on my side. Then one evening, David came down to my apartment looking uncomfortable. He said we needed to talk. My heart sank because that phrase never leads anywhere good. We sat on my couch and he told me that Jennifer had approached him earlier that day in the hallway. She'd introduced herself as my neighbor, said she was concerned about me, that I'd been acting erratically, and she was worried about my mental health. According to David, Jennifer had told him that I'd been harassing her for months, sending her threatening messages, posting lies about her online, trying to get her evicted. She said I'd developed some kind of obsession with her and was making her life hell. She'd told him that she'd tried to be understanding, that she knew I worked a stressful job and might be dealing with burnout, but that my behavior was escalating and she was scared. David said he'd told Jennifer that didn't sound like me at all, that he was sure there was some misunderstanding. But Jennifer had shown him screenshots of messages allegedly from me, posts with my username saying terrible things about her. David said he'd recognized my username from the community board, and the messages did look legitimate, and he just wanted to hear my side of the story. I was stunned. I asked to see the screenshots. David pulled them up on his phone. They were messages calling Jennifer names, accusing her of various things, threatening to make her life miserable. They were supposedly from my account, but I'd never written them. I told David that, swore to him I'd never sent any of those messages, that I barely interacted with Jennifer at all. David wanted to believe me, I could tell, but I could also see the doubt creeping in. Here was Jennifer with screenshots of evidence, and here was me with just my word. I logged into the community message board right there on my laptop, showed him my account, went through my sent messages. The messages Jennifer had shown him weren't there. I checked my posting history, nothing. I changed my password right in front of him, explained that Jennifer must have somehow gotten access to my account or created fake screenshots. David seemed relieved. He said he'd believed me but had needed to ask, had needed to see for himself. He apologized for doubting me even for a second. We spent the rest of the evening talking about Jennifer, trying to figure out what her deal was. David mentioned he'd seen her around the building before, thought she'd seemed nice enough the few times they'd exchanged hellos. He couldn't understand why she'd be doing this. I couldn't either. That's what was driving me crazy. I needed to understand the why. The next day was Saturday and I was off work. I decided I was going to talk to Jennifer directly, confront her face-to-face and demand to know what I'd done to her. I knocked on her door around 10 in the morning. She answered in pajamas, coffee mug in hand, looking like she'd just woken up. I didn't give her a chance to shut me out. I said we needed to talk, that I knew she'd been behind the message board posts and the complaints and the fake screenshots, and I wanted to know why. She tried to close the door, but I put my hand out to stop it. I wasn't aggressive, didn't push or anything, just blocked it from closing. I told her I wasn't leaving until we talked. She stared at me for a long moment, and then something in her face changed. The innocent, confused expression she usually wore melted away and was replaced with that same look of hatred I'd seen in the hallway. She stepped back and opened the door wider, gestured for me to come in. I hesitated, suddenly aware that going into her apartment might not be the smartest idea, but I needed answers. Her apartment was laid out exactly like mine, but decorated completely differently. Where mine was minimal and practical, hers was cluttered with photos and decorations and knickknacks. She sat down on her couch and took a sip of her coffee, looking at me with this cold, calculating expression. She asked me if I really didn't know why she was doing this. I said I genuinely had no idea. She laughed, but it wasn't a friendly laugh. She said that was typical, that people like me never noticed the damage we caused, just breezed through life oblivious to everyone else. I asked her to explain what she meant. She set down her coffee mug very carefully and said David, just his name like it explained everything. I said I didn't understand. David and I had just started dating. We'd met after all this weirdness started. She shook her head and said the snakes were before David. That was true, but that was just supposed to be a minor annoyance, a little payback for the Christmas tree thing and for being so smug and perfect all the time. I was baffled. Payback for a Christmas tree vote from over a year ago, but before I could say anything, she continued. She said everything changed when she saw me with David. She'd been working up the courage to talk to him for months, had noticed him when he first moved in, had engineered little run-ins in the lobby and the mailroom. She'd been planning to ask him out, had a whole strategy mapped out. Then she'd seen us at the coffee shop together that first day, had watched through the window as we talked and laughed, had felt sick when she saw him write his number on my napkin. She said she'd followed us to the restaurant on our first date, had sat at the bar and watched us, had gone home and cried. This was insane. I told her I'd had no idea she was interested in David, that if I'd known I would have. What? Not dated him. That didn't seem fair either. I tried to be diplomatic, said I was sorry she was hurt, but that I hadn't intentionally done anything to harm her. She cut me off and said that was exactly the problem, that I hadn't even noticed her, hadn't even considered her a competitor, had just taken what she wanted without a second thought. I tried to reason with her, pointed out that David was his own person, that he'd asked me out, not the other way around. She said that didn't matter, that I'd stolen him, that everything had been going according to her plan until I interfered. She said she'd tried to make me leave, had tried to make my life difficult enough that I'd move out of the building, but I'd been too stubborn. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. She said that if she couldn't have David, she'd make sure I couldn't either. She was going to show him who I really was, going to expose me as the crazy, unstable person she'd been making me out to be. She'd already planted seeds of doubt, had more screenshots prepared, had more complaints ready to file. She was going to gaslight me until either I broke or David believed her. I stood up to leave, told her she was unhinged, and I was going to report her for harassment. She smiled and said go ahead. She had months of documented evidence of my erratic behavior, had witnesses who would confirm the noise and the smoking and the weird snake obsession. Who would they believe, her or me? I left her apartment shaking with anger and fear. She was right about one thing. She'd built a whole case against me, and I had very little to refute it except my own word. I went straight to David's apartment and told him everything Jennifer had said. He was horrified, said we should go to the police, that this was stalking and harassment. I agreed, and we went to the police station that afternoon. The officer who took our statement was polite but not particularly encouraging. He said that unless Jennifer had made explicit threats of violence, there wasn't much they could do about message board posts and building complaints. He suggested I document everything, keep records, maybe get a restraining order if she continued to contact me directly. But a lot of what she'd done was technically through official channels, filing complaints with building management, and that wasn't illegal even if the complaints were false. We left the police station feeling defeated. David held my hand and promised we'd get through this together, that Jennifer was clearly unstable and would eventually expose herself. I wanted to believe him, but I had a sinking feeling things were going to get worse before they got better. I was right. The next week I got called into Carol's office again. This time she had a stack of complaints even thicker than before. Noise violations, smoking violations, reports of aggressive behavior in the hallways, reports of threats made to other residents. All of it was lies, but Carol said she had to take it seriously given the volume of complaints. She said she was putting me on a final warning, that one more violation would result in eviction proceedings. I tried to explain about Jennifer, about the harassment, showed Carol the police report I'd filed. Carol looked uncomfortable and said she couldn't take sides in interpersonal disputes between residents, that she had to go by the documented complaints she'd received. I asked if any of the complaints were from Jennifer directly. Carol hesitated, then said no. The complaints were from various residents throughout the building. I realized Jennifer had been smart about it, had filed complaints through multiple accounts, or convinced other people to file them for her. I asked Carol if she could verify that these complaints were from real people, if she could confirm that the residents who'd supposedly filed them actually existed and had actually reported issues. Carol said she didn't have time to launch an investigation into every complaint, that she had a building to manage. I left her office feeling hopeless. That evening, I came home to find a note slipped under my door. It was handwritten, not signed, but I recognized the handwriting from the note Marcus had left with the second snake. It said, "He's going to see who you really are. You're already losing him. Just make it easy on yourself and leave." I took a photo of the note and added it to my documentation file, which was growing depressingly large. David came over that night and I showed him the note. He was furious, wanted to go confront Jennifer himself. I stopped him, said that's exactly what she wanted to provoke some kind of confrontation she could use as more evidence against me. We came up with a plan. David would pretend to distance himself from me, would act like he was having doubts, like Jennifer's campaign was working. Meanwhile, we'd try to catch her in the act of something, get actual proof of her harassment that would be undeniable. It meant we'd have to be careful about being seen together, would have to sneak around in our own building, but we were desperate. The plan started the next day. David made a point of being cold to me in the elevator when Jennifer was present. I played along, acted hurt and confused. Jennifer looked pleased. Over the next week, David started, coincidentally, running into Jennifer more often, would chat with her in the lobby, started following her back on social media. She took the bait completely, started dressing nicer, wearing more makeup, always seemed to be in the right place at the right time to bump into him. Meanwhile, I set up a security camera pointed at my apartment door, one of those doorbell cameras that records motion. I also set up audio recording in my apartment to timestamp any noise violations that might be reported. I documented every single thing I did, every time I entered or left the building, every interaction with every neighbor. David reported back to me through encrypted messages on an app Jennifer wouldn't know to check. He said she was already starting to badmouth me to him, little comments here and there about how sad it was that I was so unstable, how she'd tried to be my friend but I'd pushed everyone away. She'd invited him for coffee, and he'd accepted, suffering through an hour of her talking about how difficult it must be for him to have gotten involved with someone like me. It was working, but it was also torture. I hated seeing posts on social media of David and Jennifer getting coffee, hated the sympathetic looks other neighbors started giving me like I was the crazy ex-girlfriend, even though David and I had never broken up. We were still together in secret. He'd sneak down to my apartment late at night, using the stairs instead of the elevator, would leave early in the morning before anyone else was up. It felt like we were having an affair, except we were just trying to outsmart a stalker. Then Jennifer made her mistake. She got overconfident. She'd filed another noise complaint for a Friday night, claiming there'd been a loud party in my apartment until 2 in the morning with music and shouting. But I had time-stamped video evidence of me entering my apartment at 7 p.m. and not leaving until 6 a.m. the next morning. I also had audio recording from inside my apartment showing normal noise levels, just TV at a reasonable volume until I went to bed at 10:30, then silence. I took the evidence to Carol and demanded she review it. Carol reluctantly agreed, watched the video footage, listened to the audio. She admitted it didn't match the complaint that had been filed. I asked her who had filed that particular complaint. She checked her records and said it had been called in anonymously to the after-hours line, someone claiming to be from the 3rd floor. I pointed out that you couldn't hear anything from my 4th-floor apartment from the 3rd floor, that the complaint was obviously fake. Carol said she'd make a note of it, but seemed reluctant to do anything more. I realized Carol just didn't want to deal with the drama, would rather I just moved out and made the problem go away. That's when I decided to go on the offensive. I'd been playing defense this whole time, just trying to prove the accusations against me were false. But Jennifer had made false complaints, had harassed me, had potentially accessed my account without authorization to create those fake screenshots. I contacted a lawyer, one who specialized in harassment cases. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia, reviewed all my documentation and said I had a solid case for a restraining order and potentially a civil lawsuit for defamation and harassment. She drafted a cease and desist letter and had it delivered to Jennifer. She also sent a letter to the building management outlining the harassment I'd experienced and putting them on notice that if they proceeded with any eviction action based on false complaints, I would sue them as well. Jennifer's response was to escalate. 2 days after receiving the cease and desist letter, someone smashed the windshield of my car in the parking garage. There were no security cameras in that section of the garage, conveniently. I couldn't prove it was Jennifer, but the timing was suspicious. I filed a police report and my insurance covered most of the damage, but it was another violation, another intrusion into my sense of safety. Then David told me Jennifer had asked him out on a proper date, dinner at a nice restaurant. He wanted to refuse, but I told him to go to keep up the pretense a little longer. Patricia, my lawyer, thought we were close to having enough evidence to get a restraining order, but one more clear incident of harassment would seal it. David reluctantly agreed. He wore a wire to the dinner, a recording app on his phone in his pocket. Jennifer spent the whole meal talking about me, according to the recording David played for me later. She told him I'd been institutionalized in the past for mental health issues, which was a complete fabrication. She said I'd been fired from my job for stealing medications, which was absolutely untrue. She said she was worried I might become violent, that he should be careful. David had pushed back gently, asked if she had proof of any of these claims. Jennifer had gotten flustered, said she'd heard things from other people, couldn't reveal her sources. Then she'd changed tactics, put her hand on David's hand across the table, told him he deserved better, that she could make him happy if he'd just give her a chance. David had removed his hand politely and said he appreciated her concern, but he was capable of making his own decisions about his relationships. Jennifer hadn't taken it well. According to David, her whole demeanor had changed. The sweet act had dropped away. She'd accused him of leading her on, said he'd been flirting with her, giving her signals. David had calmly said he'd been friendly but nothing more, that he was sorry if she'd misinterpreted. Jennifer had gotten loud then, loud enough that other diners had started to stare. She'd called him an asshole, said he was just like every other man, using women and throwing them away. David had put money on the table for his half of the meal and left. Jennifer had followed him out to the parking lot, still yelling. David had gotten in his car and driven away, but not before his phone had captured audio of Jennifer screaming that she'd make both of us sorry, that we deserved each other, and we'd both regret humiliating her. That recording was exactly what we needed. Patricia filed for an emergency restraining order the next morning, citing the pattern of harassment, the false complaints, and the explicit threat captured on the recording. The judge granted a temporary restraining order and scheduled a hearing for the following week to determine if it should be made permanent. Jennifer was served with the restraining order at the building. Marcus told me later that she'd screamed and cried when the process server handed her the papers, had claimed she was the victim, that I was the one harassing her. The restraining order required her to stay at least 100 feet away from me and David, which was going to be difficult given we lived in the same building. The hearing was intense. Patricia had prepared a whole presentation with timelines, documentation, evidence. We had the security footage showing no noise violations, the recording of Jennifer's threats, screenshots of all the message board posts with IP address information that showed they'd come from Jennifer's apartment. We had Marcus's testimony about the snakes and how Jennifer had planted the false information. Jennifer had a lawyer too, a guy who seemed barely prepared and kept asking for recesses to consult with his client. Jennifer's defense was that she'd been trying to help me, that she'd been concerned about my welfare, that any complaints she'd filed had been legitimate concerns. Her lawyer tried to paint David's recording as entrapment, but the judge wasn't buying it. The judge granted a permanent restraining order. Jennifer was required to stay away from both me and David, couldn't contact us directly or indirectly, couldn't post about us online. The judge also noted that if Jennifer's residence made it impossible to comply with the restraining order, she'd need to consider relocating, which was a nice legal way of saying, you might have to move out. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Jennifer didn't move out. Instead, she started complying with the letter of the restraining order while violating its spirit. She'd position herself in common areas of the building at times she knew I'd be coming or going, staying just beyond the 100-foot boundary, but making sure I saw her. She'd stare at me with this cold hatred until I was out of sight. She started a blog. It didn't use my name or David's name, but it was clearly about us. She wrote long posts about narcissistic neighbors and manipulative men, about how the legal system failed victims of harassment. She built up a small following of people who believed her narrative, who left comments supporting her and demonizing the unnamed people who'd abused her. Patricia sent another cease and desist about the blog, but it was harder to enforce because Jennifer was technically careful not to include identifying information. It was frustrating, but at least the direct harassment had stopped. The message board posts had ended, the fake complaints had stopped. Carol from building management had actually apologized to me, said she should have taken my concerns more seriously earlier on. She didn't offer to reimburse me for the legal fees or the stress, but at least she acknowledged she'd dropped the ball. David and I stopped sneaking around. We were official, out in the open. We'd have dinner on his balcony or mine, would hold hands in the lobby, normal couple stuff. Every time Jennifer saw us, I could see her jaw clench, could see her hands ball into fists, but she'd maintain her distance, would comply with the restraining order. Months passed, life started to feel normal again. I got a promotion at work, moved from the ER to a supervisory position with better hours and better pay. David got a big design contract that would keep him busy for the next year. We talked about moving in together, maybe getting a bigger place in a different building, leaving all this drama behind. Then Jennifer moved out. I came home one day to find a moving truck outside the building and Jennifer directing movers as they loaded furniture. I stayed in my car until they were done, didn't want to risk any kind of confrontation. When I finally went inside, Marcus told me Jennifer had broken her lease and was leaving. He said good riddance, that she'd been nothing but trouble. I felt relieved it was finally over. Jennifer was gone, moving on with her life, and David and I could move on with ours without looking over our shoulders. I went up to David's apartment to tell him the good news. We celebrated with wine and takeout, made plans for the future, laughed about how crazy the whole situation had been. 2 weeks later, David broke up with me. He said we needed to talk, sat me down, and told me he didn't think it was working out. I was blindsided. Things had been great between us, or so I thought. I asked what had changed, what I'd done wrong. He said it wasn't any one thing. He just didn't feel the connection anymore, thought we'd gotten together under stressful circumstances, and maybe we'd been bonding over the drama more than actually being compatible. I was devastated but tried to be mature about it. I asked if we could try to work on it, maybe go to couples counseling. He said he didn't think it would help, his mind was made up. We'd been together for almost 8 months at that point, had talked about moving in together just weeks before, and now he was ending it out of nowhere. I cried for days, called in sick to work, ignored my friends and family, just wallowed in the breakup. I kept replaying our last few weeks together, trying to figure out what I'd missed, what signs I'd ignored. David had seemed happy, had been affectionate and attentive, and then suddenly he wasn't. About a week after the breakup, my sister came over to check on me. She's a software engineer, very logical and practical, not prone to conspiracy theories, but she said something about the timing that stuck with me. Jennifer had moved out, and then almost immediately David had broken up with me. What if those two things were connected? I told her that was crazy, that Jennifer was gone, that she couldn't have done anything. My sister pointed out that Jennifer had a blog, had social media, had clearly been obsessed with the situation. What if she'd contacted David somehow, told him something, done something to sabotage us? I checked David's social media, but he'd unfollowed Jennifer months ago and she'd never followed him. I checked the blog, but there were no new posts since before Jennifer moved. I tried to think of ways Jennifer could have contacted David without violating the restraining order, maybe through a third party or an anonymous account. Then I remembered David's big design contract, the one he'd been so excited about. He'd mentioned it had come through a referral from a mutual friend, someone who'd recommended him to a company looking for a designer. I'd never asked who the mutual friend was, had just been happy for him. I texted David, tried to keep it casual, asked how the design contract was going. He responded that it was going well, keeping him busy. I asked if he'd ever told me who had referred him. He said he didn't remember mentioning it, but it was a woman named Lisa who used to work at his old firm in Portland. I asked if he'd been in touch with Lisa recently. He said they'd gotten coffee a few times, she'd moved to the area for work and had reached out to reconnect. My stomach dropped. I asked when Lisa had moved here. David said a few months ago, around the time Jennifer had moved out. I did some social media detective work, found Lisa's profiles, scrolled through her photos. There, buried in her Instagram from about 4 months ago, was a photo of her at a coffee shop with someone who looked familiar. I zoomed in. It was Jennifer. The caption said, "Great catching up with my old friend." I felt sick. I dug deeper, cross-referenced everything I could find. Lisa and Jennifer had gone to the same college, had been roommates freshman year. There were old photos of them together at parties, tagged posts from years ago. They'd stayed friends, at least on social media. Jennifer hadn't contacted David directly. She'd used Lisa, had probably told Lisa some version of her false narrative about me being unstable and dangerous, had convinced Lisa to move here, to reach out to David, to befriend him. And Lisa, trusting her old friend, had believed her and had slowly poisoned David against me. I tried to tell David. I sent him everything I'd found, the connection between Lisa and Jennifer, the timeline that showed Lisa had moved here right when Jennifer left. I explained that I thought Jennifer had set the whole thing up, was using Lisa to get revenge on us. David didn't believe me. He said I was being paranoid, seeing conspiracies where there were none. He said Lisa was a friend and colleague, nothing more, and that she'd never said anything bad about me. He said the breakup had nothing to do with anyone else. He just realized we weren't right for each other. But I knew I was right. I could feel it. Jennifer had found a loophole in the restraining order, had used her friend as a proxy to get to David, to convince him I was bad news. It was brilliant in a twisted way, and I had no way to prove it. I tried to move on. I stayed in the apartment even though it held bad memories now, because moving would feel like Jennifer had won. I threw myself into work, spent time with my sister and my friends, tried dating apps without much success. I'd see David sometimes in the building, and we'd exchange awkward nods. I heard through the building gossip that he was seeing someone, though I tried not to think about whether it was Lisa. Months went by. I was doing better, healing from everything that had happened. Then I got a message request on social media from an account I didn't recognize. The message said, "You were right about everything. I'm sorry. We need to talk. L." I was suspicious it might be another one of Jennifer's tricks, so I didn't respond right away. Then I got an email at my work address, which was semi-public through the hospital's website. Same message, signed Lisa. I agreed to meet her in a public place, a busy cafe during lunch hour. I brought my sister with me for backup, had her sit at a nearby table. Lisa showed up looking tired and nervous. She sat down and immediately apologized, said she'd been a fool, that Jennifer had lied to her about everything. According to Lisa, Jennifer had contacted her about 6 months earlier, not long before she moved out of the building. Jennifer had told her she was fleeing an abusive situation, that a neighbor had become obsessed with her, and had gotten a restraining order through lies and manipulation. She'd said she was scared for her life and needed help. Lisa, being a good friend, had offered to help. Jennifer had said she needed someone to keep an eye on her abuser, to make sure they didn't come after her. She'd asked Lisa to befriend David, said he was an innocent victim who didn't know what kind of person he was dating. Jennifer had painted me as a dangerous stalker who'd manipulated David into believing her lies. Lisa had believed her and had moved to the city partially for work but partially to help Jennifer. She'd reached out to David, had started feeding him small doubts about me. Nothing overt, just little comments here and there about relationship red flags, about moving too fast, about how traumatic relationships can cloud judgment. She'd suggested he take a step back and evaluate whether he was really happy or just caught up in drama. It had worked. David had started to doubt, had convinced himself that maybe the relationship had been based more on the intensity of the Jennifer situation than actual compatibility. Lisa had encouraged him to trust his instincts, had supported his decision to end things. But then Lisa had found my blog post. I'd written about the experience, not using real names but detailing the harassment and the stalking and the legal battle. Lisa had read it and something had clicked. She'd confronted Jennifer, asked if there was any truth to the story. Jennifer had denied it, had gotten angry that Lisa would believe a stranger on the internet over her. So Lisa had done her own investigation. She talked to people at our apartment building, had reviewed public court records of the restraining order, had found the documented evidence of Jennifer's harassment. She'd realized Jennifer had lied to her, had used her to continue harassing David and me even after the restraining order. Lisa was crying by the time she finished telling me this. She said she was horrified that she'd been part of it, that she'd helped break up my relationship based on lies. She wanted to make it right, wanted to tell David the truth. I appreciated the apology, but I was also angry. I asked why she hadn't done more due diligence before inserting herself into David's life, before helping to sabotage my relationship. She said she'd trusted her friend, had no reason to doubt her story. I said that wasn't good enough, that she'd helped destroy something good because she'd been too lazy or too trusting to verify what she'd been told. She took it, didn't try to defend herself further. She asked what she could do to fix it. I said she needed to tell David everything, the whole truth about why she'd really reconnected with him and what Jennifer had asked her to do. She agreed. Lisa met with David that week. I don't know exactly what was said, but David showed up at my apartment a few days later looking shell-shocked. He said Lisa had told him everything, that he felt like an idiot, that he was so sorry. He said he'd broken up with me based on doubts that weren't even real, that had been planted by Jennifer through Lisa. I wanted to forgive him, wanted to fall into his arms and go back to how things were, but I couldn't. He'd given up on us so easily, had believed the doubts without even talking to me about them. Yes, Jennifer had manipulated the situation, but David had made the choice to end things. He'd made the choice to believe he wasn't happy anymore without examining where those feelings were really coming from. I told him I appreciated the apology, but I didn't think we could get back together. Too much had happened, too much trust had been broken. He cried, actual tears, begged me to give him another chance. I told him I needed time to think. That was 3 months ago. David and I have been slowly rebuilding a friendship, having coffee sometimes, talking about our lives. He's not seeing anyone, says he's working on himself, trying to be more aware of outside influences and trusting his own judgment. I'm doing the same, going to therapy, processing all the trauma from the Jennifer situation and the breakup. I don't know if we'll ever get back together. Part of me wants to, part of me thinks too much damage has been done. Jennifer won in a lot of ways. She destroyed our relationship even after she'd left, even with a restraining order in place. But she also lost because she's the one who had to move, who lost the apartment she wanted, who's probably still obsessing over this whole situation while I'm moving forward with my life. I heard through Lisa, who I'm now cordially in touch with, that Jennifer is living 2 states away and still maintaining her victim blog, still posting about the narcissists who ruined her life. She's built her whole identity around this grievance, which seems like a miserable way to live. Meanwhile, I got another promotion, I'm traveling more, I have good friends and family, and I'm genuinely happy most days. Sometimes I see a snake and I think about that first night when Marcus showed up at my door with that garden snake, how that was the beginning of all of this insanity. It seems so ridiculous now that someone would go to such lengths over a guy she'd never even dated, over perceived slights that mostly existed in her own head. But that's what obsession does. It warps reality until everything becomes personal, everything becomes an attack. I still live in the same apartment. Marcus still works security and we've become actual friends now, sometimes grab lunch together. Carol is still the building manager and still seems perpetually stressed, though she's been much more responsive to concerns since the whole Jennifer situation. David still lives upstairs, and sometimes I run into him in the elevator and my heart still does a little flip. Last week, David asked if I wanted to have dinner with him, not as a date but as friends. I said yes. We went to a different restaurant this time, one without any bad memories attached. We talked about work and movies and normal things. At the end of the night, he walked me back to the building, and at my door, he asked if I thought we'd ever be able to try again. I told him I honestly didn't know. Maybe someday, when enough time has passed, when I can trust that his feelings are really his and not planted by someone else. When I can trust that he won't give up on us the first time things get uncertain. He said he understood, that he'd wait as long as it took, or he'd accept it if I decided the answer was no. I don't know what I'm going to decide. What I do know is that I survived something crazy, came out the other side stronger and more aware. I learned that people can be cruel and deceptive in ways I'd never imagined. I learned that the legal system can help but isn't perfect. I learned that documentation is everything, that trust has to be earned, and that sometimes the person you think you know has depths of crazy you never suspected. I also learned that I'm more resilient than I thought. I didn't break, didn't move away, didn't let Jennifer win completely. I stood my ground, fought back legally and ethically, and came out of it intact. That's worth something. So here I am, still in the same apartment where this all started, still living my life, still moving forward. Jennifer is somewhere else, hopefully getting the help she needs, but probably not. David is upstairs, waiting for an answer I'm not ready to give. And I'm okay with all of it, okay with the uncertainty, okay with taking my time to figure out what I really want. The snake that started all of this is probably living its best life in some wildlife sanctuary, completely unaware of the chaos its capture set in motion. Sometimes I think about that snake and laugh at the absurdity of it all. A security guard, a snake, and a lie, and my whole life turned upside down for months. But I'm here, I'm okay, and that's what matters. Whatever happens next with David, whatever Jennifer does from 2 states away, whatever drama comes next in this apartment building, I know I can handle it. I've been through worse, survived it, and came out stronger. And if Marcus ever shows up at my door with another snake, I'm going to politely decline and suggest he call actual wildlife services. Lesson learned.